Napoleon Hill said, "Our only limits are the ones we set in our own minds." Now, unfortunately, most people are limiting themselves from getting to that next level. Maybe that's you watching right now. Maybe you're wanting to play higher stakes, or you're wanting to create financial freedom for yourself, or maybe get your body in the best shape you've ever been in. But there's that lingering voice in your head that tells you that it might not be possible for you. You want to believe it, but you don't truly believe it. So today we're going to explore why we would set limits in our own minds, and more importantly, how to move past them. Once you understand this, everything changes. And there's a skill that you can develop that will allow you to realize your full potential. So strap in. Now, I struggled with limitations most of my life. I didn't believe I was very smart. I always thought I was bad with money, and therefore I was broke. I had a scarcity mindset, and I didn't really believe that much was possible for my life. Now, what I didn't realize at the time was how much I'd been conditioned by my past experiences and how much my mind was trying to protect me from moving forward. And I'd created all these believable stories that I felt was real, that was really stopping me from moving towards my goals. Now, things started to change for me. My own growth really took off when I started to explore the stories I was telling myself about myself. You know that narrating voice in your head that tells you, you can do this, but don't try that. And I started to really question what its incentives were and why I kept telling myself I couldn't do stuff. Now, this led me in a deep exploration of the mind. So I want to share with you guys what I've learned on my journey, and hopefully this will be useful for you and moving past your obstacles as well. So the first thing I realized about the mind when I studied it was that it's a survival mechanism. So it wants to keep us safe and protect us from harm. No shocks there, and you can see this everywhere. If you, when you're a child, you touch a hot stove, you very quickly learn that's hot. If something's dangerous, you learn not to go to dangerous places. And we can see how that's a really good survival mechanism to keep us safe. All right, so no one's going to really want to override that survival feature of the mind, keeping us safe, keeping the body safe. However, this didn't really add up for me. And I started to think, well, nothing I'm doing or trying to do is dangerous. I'm not jumping out of planes, though I did do that once. I'm not putting myself in physical harm. I just want to achieve financial success, achieve poker success, achieve things in the world. And none of them were dangerous. So why was my mind protecting me? Then I started to realize and go deeper into the mind and see that the mind also protects something else. Not just the body, it also protects our self-image. All right, so as we're growing up in particular, we develop a self-image of who we think we are, what we think we're capable of, and the things we think we can do. All right, some people call this your ego, but it's your self-construct and self-image. Now, although this is built on experiences, generally in your formative years, we start to believe that this is a kind of a rigid structure. All right, so the mind treats our self-image very much in the same way as it treats the body. It wants to protect our self-image so we don't do things that could damage us. And it also wants to make sure we don't potentially do something that could be risky. Now, this creates problems because our self-image is generally built on our past experiences. All right, so for example, some of my past experiences when I was younger, I was always bad with money. So my self-image was Adam is bad with money. So now my mind starts protecting me from situations that might risk money, that might risk putting things on the line. And now I'm limiting myself from what I can do based on my mind's almost like survival mechanisms of trying to protect itself. So think of examples where maybe you want to talk to a girl and the worst thing that could happen is she rejects you, or you're going to public speak in front of a group of people and the worst thing that could happen is they don't like you or they think you're an idiot, or you're going to play higher stakes poker and you might lose some money, which is valuable resources. None of these things are really dangerous, but internally we have a lot of resistance to these things. We get scared, we stop ourselves moving forward. Now, if we learn to examine what's going on, we realize, the mind is telling me a story to stop me from potentially getting into danger. Now, this is where I want to focus all of today's video on, the limiting stories we tell ourselves to protect ourselves. All right, so I'm going to share some of my stories and my journey into exploring this, and then I'll bring it back to you guys as poker players and how you can override this. And there's a system and a skill that you can learn, which I wish I learned earlier, that allows you to keep moving forward. All right, in facing the reality of this voice in your head that's limiting you and pushing past it. So I had many problems, as I mentioned, with money throughout my life and career as a poker player, but the first few years actually went surprisingly okay financially. And the reason was, started poker in 2011, flew to Thailand with some friends, and although I wasn't very good with like believing in myself at this moment, it was quite a fun journey. I was living with friends and it was always learning this fun game. So the first few years I was kind of caught up in this is fun, this is exciting, this is novel, and I actually progressed quite quickly. And I went from playing $15 heads up sit and goes to $200, $300 heads up sit and goes within 2 years. And I created a decent financial buffer for myself, and I was playing, mid-stakes we call it online. And it was around this time that I realized that the mind started to get very active, and the mind started to tell myself stories, and I started to notice the mind was saying, oh, I think you've done well, but play things safe now. Don't risk going any higher. There's no way you can play 500s or 1Ks. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. Those guys will beat you. I remember this voice in my head become very clear. It almost like a ceiling had just appeared out of nowhere, and I knew my place. And I was like, yeah, that's true, Adam. You've done well, but don't get too big for your bridges, and don't overextend yourself. Settle for what you've got. You've done well, settle for what you've got. So I listened to this voice, and although my role built up, again, I was overcoming some limitations I had financially this time, but I was building my role slowly, and I decided to play Supernova Elite Volume on PokerStars. So this was super high volume, like 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And this was very much me in my comfort zone. It was a lot of hours, but I wasn't risking not being smart enough, not being good enough. So I stayed there for 3 years, and I just became a volume machine, churning out volume after volume, and getting my Supernova Elite rake back, which was very lucrative at the time. However, really, I was scared to find out if I was good enough to play higher. Now, this voice kept going in my head for a long time, and I really thought that I couldn't play higher. I literally looked at the names in those lobbies and thought, I just can't play those guys. They've been playing for ages. They've got the best win rates. They got the biggest win-ins. There's no way I could beat those guys. Now, by some chance occurrence, basically, I ended up reg battling a lot at 300s over the end of 2014. And I remember working on my game a lot during that time, and my reg game got better and better and better. And then an opportunity became available to shot take higher. Basically, a few of the guys who were dominant players in those games, one was Dan Coleman, called Mr. Green online. He was probably the strongest player in the game. He won the one drop for the $1 million buy-in. I think it was the first one drop. And then he stopped kind of playing online. And he was a big gatekeeper of the online heads up sit and go lobbies. So when he moved out the way, and I was right battling a lot at the time, so me and my friends decided like, what happens if the guys who are above us aren't as good as we thought they were? Should we give them a try? And I remember this was super scary. Like, this conversation was quite a fun conversation over coffee and a few lunches. And then we decided, right, well, why don't we just play them? Like, we've talked about this for years. Like, why don't we just load up the lobbies and play these guys? And I remember being terrified and going, really? Like, should we do this? Should we just talk about it and not do it? And it was a scary even thing to think about playing guys who I thought were better than me. Then the time came and we said, right, let's just go for it. Let's play for a number of weeks and months and see how we get on. So I decided to go for this plan, and we sat the best players in our games. So this was January the 5th, I remember the first days, 2015. I remember loading up games with some of the best regulars in my format and thinking, this is it. This is where I get found out. They're going to realize I suck. They're going to hunt me down to my lower lobbies, and I'm going to get absolutely smashed. Now, even this realization was quite an interesting point, because I was coming to terms with, I've limited myself, but I'm stepping into it. So for the first time, I was actually feeling the fear, but I was stepping into that fear. All right, so it's kind of a transformational moment for me, because I was seeing my limitations, but I wasn't letting them stop me. So now I'm playing against these guys, and first few days, first few weeks were quite chaotic. And I remember my first session in particular, I got crushed for some reg who took 10 buys off me. 10 buys at 1Ks for me was a big financial hit. And I remember all the self-doubt like really getting strong in my mind. But at the same time, I still thought, well, let's just keep playing. Let's just figure out if I can do this, so to speak. And I remember over weeks and months in particular, I got very comfortable. I remember thinking some of these guys are good, but some of these guys aren't as good as I thought they were. And I remember thinking, I feel challenged, but I don't feel out of my depth. I feel like these guys are good, but they're not great. And I started to build a bit of belief that wait a minute, maybe, just maybe, I've got what it takes to beat these guys. Now, I wish I could say from there, I just crushed everybody and it was just a smooth line into the 1Ks, but it was not what happened. I actually lost about 75% of my bankroll over 8 months. There was long battles, moments of self-doubt, moments of questioning myself, but something was different here. And the different thing was, I was finding out what I was capable of. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't holding on to a limited story. I was in there playing every day, trying to get to a new outcome. And I remember the growth throughout this patch. Like, I remember that on one side, the self-doubt and the, can I do this? And the other side of, I'm proud of myself for trying. I'm proud of myself for stepping into this. I'm proud of myself for every day showing up and testing myself and struggling and trying to figure things out. But the next day, showing up again. And finally, I got led into the 1K lobbies after 8 months. And during the next few years, it was super lucrative at those lobbies, set myself up financially for the future. And my profitability went through the roof. If I'd have stayed at mid-stakes, I would have earned probably a third of what I earned from jumping up. But the biggest thing that showed me was I'd been limiting myself for years. I had been holding myself back to protect myself from potentially failing. And I started to examine where else I was doing this in my life. Where else was I setting these imaginary ceilings? I was setting it with money. I was setting it with what I thought I was capable of in my life. I was setting it with even my self-image of how smart I thought I was, or what I thought I was capable of. I was doing it in the gym, what I thought my body was capable of looking like. And I realized I had limitations everywhere. But now, rather than hold my back, I started to examine them. I started to go, well, is that limitation real? Is that actually a true thing that's holding me back? As I worked more and more on myself, I got more and more curious about where my real limits were and what I was capable of. And I started to realize almost every time I think I've reached a limit, it's just me. The only thing in the way is me. It's not talent, it's not environment, it's not circumstances, it's just me in my own way, and I can move past that. This is what led me to go into mindset and performance coaching, because I become very passionate about teaching other people to level up and to become better at what they do. And as I started to go into coaching and working with poker players, I realized a lot of the limitations that I had struggled with throughout my life and through my poker journey, other players were struggling with. Almost every player who I worked with had some limitation they were setting themselves, whether they could play higher stakes, whether they could achieve financial outcomes, whether they could create a lifestyle and freedom that they wanted for themselves. Almost every player I worked with was telling themselves stories that was holding them back. Now, this is when it became fascinating and I realized, I went through a framework to overcome these limitations. If I can do it, I'm pretty sure other players can do it too. And this is when I really started to double down on teaching poker players a skill that allows them to push past their limitations. Now, every time you get stuck in life, I think it's really powerful to realize two things. One, you're getting in your own way. And two, there's a skill that you can develop that can get you past it. And this is so empowering because if you realize it's just a skill that you lack and you're the person in the way, there's nothing that can stop you. It's just, okay, well, how do I get out my own way? And what skill do I learn to move past that? So today I want to focus on how to get out your own way by learning a very, very valuable skill. And this skill is so important. It's actually the first skill I teach my poker athlete students. I teach them 8 skills over the course of 8 immersive weeks. And I spent a lot of time thinking about which skill should come first. And this is the skill that has to come first because everything else is built on it. All right. So the overall skill is self-awareness. And self-awareness is understanding what you think about yourself. And the sub-skill within that, which we're going to talk about today, and the framework for, is overcoming limiting beliefs. Overcoming the stories that you tell yourself that hold you back. Now, because it's a skill, there's a framework that you can follow that helps you move past it. There's a skill that can help you get next level. We can train skills from one level to the next. All right. So there's a framework I want to share with you on how to level up this skill. All right. So first of all, you need to know your current level for the skill. Secondly, you need to understand how the skill works at your level. And thirdly, you need to practice and train that skill to a higher level. You then repeat that process and level it up further and further. So the skill itself is self-awareness. The sub-skill is your beliefs. Now let's go through the framework of, first of all, knowing your current skill level. So this starts with examining the stories you tell yourself in the areas that are important in your life, the key areas you're trying to progress, whether it's poker, financial. What are the stories you are telling yourself? So here's 2 questions you can ask yourself to get yourself started. First of all, in which area of my life have I been struggling to make progress? And second one, what are the stories I'm telling myself in this area that are holding me back? All right, you're trying to examine where exactly you want to make progress and where are you limiting yourself. And here you've got to be a detective. Your mind's very tricky. It tries to disguise things as, oh yeah, that's not really limitation. It's just bad variance. It's just out of my control. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. There's always something that's limiting you that's in your control. All right, so examine them, the stories in the areas that are important to you. All right, so this gives us what's your current level? How's my current skill level in the nature of beliefs? All right, we can do this for any area, but generally you guys will be doing it in the poker context. Next one is understanding how the skill works at your current level. So how does the skill work? How do we train this ability to become self-aware and overcome beliefs? Well, it starts by breaking down the current stories you are telling yourself and replacing them with more accurate stories that move you forward. All right, so remember, the mind is telling us these limited stories to try and protect us. So we need to examine them and break them down. So the first thing I like to do is examine, are these stories true? As poker players, we very much like facts, we like details. And when we examine these stories, the first question you ask is, are these stories I'm telling myself in this area actually true? Really reflect on that and you'll see they're built on one or two experiences from when you were younger or one or two stories you're holding on to, but are they actually true? And you'll find often not, but do that exploration yourself and find out. Next is, what would I have to believe in this area in order to achieve the success that I wanted? All right, so what we're doing here is we're trying to swap an old story we've got, which isn't actually true, for something we'd have to believe. All right, now this is where it gets really interesting. We can get the mind to believe anything we want. All right, now this doesn't mean we trick ourselves and we do some weird self-deception, but the mind is listening to stories. So what would you have to believe in order to move you forward? And then you start to go, well, what evidence have I got? So for example, for myself, when I was doing this with moving to 1Ks, I was going, what would I have to believe in order to play higher stakes? And I had to believe that I was someone who was capable of learning and getting better. And I was capable of beating the level by learning the knowledge to beat the guys at that level. And I was like, okay, well, have you done this before? And I was like, well, I moved from 15s to 30s to 60s to 100s to 200s to 300s. So I've done it before. So yeah, I've learned before. I wasn't very good at any of those games to begin with. So I've learned before. So I've done this before. So it's the same process I've done. When it came to money, it's like, well, I've saved $1,000 before. I've saved 10,000. Can I save 100? Can I save more? And you just use the framework of what you've already done to double down on it. All right, so you replace the old ones with the new ones. All right, then finally, because it's a skill, you need to practice and train the skill to get it to a higher level. So this involves being very conscious and mindful throughout your days and watching when the mind tells you a story of what you can't do. Watch for these limiting stories. They pop up all the time on a daily basis. My mind's constantly sprouting loads of these random stories about what I can and can't do. When the mind does that, you watch it and you replace it with the more empowering story. All right, so rather than your mind going, I can't do this, you go, why can't I do this? I think I can do this. And you implant the new story. All right, so you create this whole skill of the mind is creating stories that are limiting me. Every time I say that, I will break down the truth of it. So the truth's at the foundations. Once you actually break down that it's not true, you realize it's easy to replace the story. And then you replace that with something that moves you forward. All right, over and over, you condition the mind. So you repeat, and you train and practice the skill. All right, so it's that simple. You know your current level. You understand how the skill works. It's the mind sprouting all these limiting stories, and you need to replace them with new ones, and you practice and repeat that skill over and over and over. Now, most people don't realize they're capable of getting the mind to believe what they want it to believe. And they could be conditioned for so long, thinking the same stories, that they feel that they're true. All right, now, because this is a new skill for a lot of you guys listening and watching, you have to practice for a while. All right, it's like learn to ride a bike. You don't just jump on and ride it. Well, some people do. I didn't. I had safety wheels for a long time. We need to learn the skill. So that limited voice will be strong sometimes. It will overpower us. But we can condition ourselves over time to install new ways of thinking, overcome the limiting beliefs, and install new empower ones. And this literally changes everything in your life. Now, I want to end with a quote. This is from Jordan Belfort, who's in The Wolf of Wall Street. Bit of an interesting character in that one, especially the way Leonardo DiCaprio portrays him. But this quote is really epitomizes it all. And he says, the only thing standing between you and your goal is the story you keep telling yourself about as to why you can't achieve it. That's it. The only thing in your way is a story. Can you work on getting past the story? Hell yeah, you can. You've probably done it a million times already, but there's certain stories that you need to work on to get you to that next level. Your work begins today. Good luck.